Hey everyone, I'm Peter Stories here to guide you today. If you use this video to drift off to sleep, please tap like, hit subscribe, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now settle in, get cozy, and let yourself relax. Joshua Whitmore had learned to live with the voices. 23 years as a park ranger in the Blackwood National Forest, and the last 15 of those years had been spent managing what the doctors called acute sensory sensitivity, and what his grandmother had called the gift. He didn't consider it a gift. Gifts were supposed to bring joy, weren't they? What Joshua experienced, the cold spots that preceded tragedy, the whispers in empty ranger stations, the shadows that moved with purpose rather than light, brought only dread and exhaustion. But October 31st, 2019 was different. Joshua felt it the moment he woke at dawn, a pressure behind his eyes like an approaching storm, except the weather service had called for clear skies. Halloween had always been worse for him, the veil between worlds growing gossamer thin, allowing things through that should have stayed buried. This year, though, the sensation was overwhelming, as if the world itself was holding its breath, waiting for nightfall. He stood on the porch of the main ranger station, nursing his third coffee of the morning and watching the mist cling to the valleys between the mountains. Blackwood covered 60,000 acres of dense forest in eastern Oregon, remote enough that cell service was spotty, and superstition ran deeper than the roots of the ancient pines. The locals had stories about Halloween night, stories Joshua had dismissed his first decade on the job. Stories he'd learned to respect after that October 5 years ago, when he'd found Deputy Marshal Tom Chen's patrol car abandoned near the old Holloway farmstead, engine still running, door hanging open, and no sign of Tom anywhere. They'd searched for 3 weeks, never found a body, never found so much as a boot print leading away from the vehicle. Joshua had felt Tom's terror that night, felt it like ice water in his veins even from 7 miles away. He'd radioed it in, but by the time anyone reached the location, Tom was simply gone. The official report said, lost in the wilderness, but Joshua knew better. Tom hadn't gotten lost. Something had taken him. The radio crackled to life. "Whitmore, you copy?" It was Sarah Chen, Tom's younger sister, who'd joined the Ranger Service 3 years ago. She worked dispatch on holidays, claiming she preferred the quiet. Joshua suspected she stayed close to the forest on Halloween, hoping for some sign of her brother. "Copy, Sarah, go ahead. We've got a situation. Missing hiker reported by her boyfriend about 20 minutes ago. Nicole Harper, 26, last seen on the Ridgeline Trail around noon yesterday. Boyfriend says she wanted to take photos of the fall colors, told him she'd be back before dark. Never showed." Joshua felt the cold spread through his chest. Halloween missing person. The pressure behind his eyes intensified. Did he file a report yesterday when she didn't return? A pause. No. Says he figured she went to a friend's house. Got caught up in Halloween prep. Didn't worry until this morning when she didn't answer her phone, and he found her car still parked at the Ridgeline trailhead. "I'm heading there now. Send the coordinates to my GPS." "Already done. Josh?" Sarah's voice dropped lower. "Be careful out there today. It's, you know." "I know." He killed the connection and grabbed his pack from inside the station. The others wouldn't arrive until 8. Halloween meant short staffing as rangers with families took the day to be home with their kids. Joshua had volunteered for the holiday shift as he always did. Better to be working than sitting alone in his cabin, feeling the world thin around him. The drive to the Ridgeline trailhead took 40 minutes along serpentine mountain roads. The forest pressed close on both sides, pines and Douglas firs forming walls of shadow despite the morning sun. Joshua's grandmother had been Scottish from the Isle of Skye, and she'd taught him about Sam Hine before the cancer took her when he was 12. "It's not Halloween, my darling boy," she'd whispered in her hospital bed, her accent thick even after 40 years in America. "It's Samhain, the night when the dead walk and the IOC cross over from their mounds. The Christians tried to sanitize it, make it about candy and costumes, but the old power remains. On Samhain, the veil tears, and what crosses over doesn't always go back." Joshua had thought it was the morphine talking. Now he knew better. The Ridgeline Trailhead parking lot was empty except for a silver Honda Civic, presumably Nicole Harper's vehicle. Joshua parked beside it and approached carefully, the gravel crunching under his boots loud in the morning stillness. No birds singing. That was the first thing he noticed. The forest was never this quiet, not even in winter. He pressed his hand against the Honda's hood. Cold. Been here all night, at least. The sensation hit him like a fist to the sternum. Fear. Not his own, but bleeding through from somewhere else. Somewhere close. Nicole Harper's fear, he realized, still lingering in this space like perfume. She'd been terrified when she reached this parking lot. Terrified and running. Joshua closed his eyes, trying to push past the static of panic to find anything useful. An image flickered. Darkness. Cold wind. The sound of dry stalks rustling. Corn? No. There were no cornfields in Blackwood. But something rustling. Something moving through tall vegetation with purpose and malice. He opened his eyes and steadied himself against the Honda's roof. His hands were shaking. Deep breath. Focus. He'd learned meditation techniques from a therapist in Portland, ways to filter the psychic noise that threatened to overwhelm him on bad days. Halloween was the worst day of the year, but he could manage. He had to manage. The Ridgeline Trail stretched ahead, disappearing into shadow beneath the canopy. Joshua shouldered his pack and started walking, his boots finding the familiar rhythm of the trail. He'd hiked this route hundreds of times, 6 miles to the Ridgeline overlook, then a loop back down through the valley. Moderate difficulty, well marked. Impossible to get truly lost if you paid attention to the blazes on the trees. Except people did get lost, especially on Halloween. Joshua had gone maybe half a mile when he saw the first pumpkin. It sat in the middle of the trail, perfectly placed, its carved face grinning up at the canopy. The jack-o'-lantern's eyes were triangular, its mouth a jagged crescent, and even unlit in the morning sun it radiated wrongness. Joshua stopped, his breath catching. Nobody carved pumpkins and left them on remote hiking trails. Nobody. He approached slowly, every instinct screaming at him to turn back. The pumpkin was fresh, carved recently, within the last day or two, judging by the lack of decay. The face had been cut with precision, almost surgical in its execution. Joshua crouched beside it, careful not to touch, and peered into the hollow interior. Empty. No candle. But the smell wafting from it wasn't the sweet rot of pumpkin flesh. It was earthier, darker, grave soil and autumn decay. When Joshua stood and looked ahead, he saw the second pumpkin, and then the third, and the fourth. They formed a line along the trail, spaced about 20 feet apart, all carved with the same grinning face, all radiating that same sense of deliberate wrongness. His radio crackled. He yanked it from his belt. Whitmore. Josh, it's Sarah. Any sign of Harper? Not yet. But Sarah, there are jack-o'-lanterns on the trail. Someone's been out here carving pumpkins and placing them like markers. Silence on the other end. Then, that's not possible. The trail's been closed for maintenance since Monday. Nobody should have been out there. Well, someone was. At least 7 pumpkins, all identical, all fresh. Joshua felt the cold spreading through his chest again. I'm following them. They're leading deeper into the forest. Josh, maybe you should wait for backup. No time. If Nicole Harper followed these things... He didn't finish the sentence. Didn't need to. They both knew what could happen to someone alone in Blackwood on Halloween night. Okay. Keep your radio on. Check in every 30 minutes. Copy that. Joshua pocketed the radio and continued forward, following the trail of grinning pumpkins deeper into the forest. The path diverged from the official trail around pumpkin number 9. The jack-o'-lanterns led off to the left, into underbrush that looked undisturbed except for one detail. Someone had recently pushed through. Broken twigs, crushed ferns, the faintest impression of boot treads in the soft earth. Nicole Harper's trail, Joshua was certain. She'd followed the pumpkins off the designated path. But why? Why would an experienced hiker, and according to her boyfriend, Nicole was experienced, follow a line of creepy jack-o'-lanterns into the deep forest? Joshua knew the answer even as he asked the question. Because on Halloween, with the veil thin, people didn't always have full control over their actions. The AOC could call, could compel, could make you walk toward danger with a smile on your face. He pushed into the underbrush, following Nicole's trail and the pumpkins that beckoned ahead. The forest grew denser, the canopy thicker, blocking out more and more of the morning light. Joshua's watch said 8:47 a.m., but under the trees, it felt like dusk. The temperature dropped with each step, his breath beginning to fog despite the mild October weather. Pumpkin number 14 sat beside an old fence post, half rotted and leaning at a drunken angle. Joshua stopped, his pulse quickening. He knew this fence. It marked the boundary of the Holloway property, the abandoned farmstead where Deputy Marshal Tom Chen had vanished 5 years ago. No, Joshua whispered. Not here. Anywhere but here. But the pumpkins continued, marching in a line toward the ruins of the Holloway farmhouse. And somewhere ahead, Joshua felt Nicole Harper's presence. Faint, fading, but still alive. Still alive, and still terrified. He had no choice. He continued forward, following the jack-o'-lanterns toward the place where the veil was thinnest, where things that should stay dead walked on Halloween night, where a scarecrow had stood in the same field for longer than anyone could remember, watching, waiting, hungering for the one night of the year when it could move. Joshua had seen it 5 years ago, in his nightmares after Tom disappeared, a figure of straw and burlap, impossibly tall, with button eyes that gleamed with malevolent intelligence. The locals said old Silas Holloway had made it in 1952, had poured his rage and bitterness into its construction after his crops failed for the 3rd straight year. Said he'd mixed blood with the straw, his own blood, and whispered curses in languages he shouldn't have known. Silas had died that Halloween night, found in his field with his throat torn out, the scarecrow standing over him with straw fingers dripping red. They'd burned the scarecrow, burned it and buried the ashes. But every Halloween since, someone in Blackwood disappeared. And every Halloween, rangers reported seeing a figure in the old Holloway fields, tall and shambling, crowned with a wide-brimmed hat and moving with purpose toward the forest. The farmhouse came into view through the trees, and Joshua's breath caught in his throat. The structure was a skeleton, walls collapsed, roof gone, leaving only the stone chimney and parts of the timber frame reaching toward the sky like accusing fingers. The field beyond was overgrown with thistle and wild grass, dead stalks standing tall and brown in the morning light. And in the center of that field, surrounded by a perfect circle of jack-o'-lanterns, at least 30 of them, their carved faces all turned inward, stood the scarecrow. It was exactly as Joshua had seen it in his nightmares. 10 feet tall, maybe more, constructed of bundled straw wrapped around a wooden frame. Its arms were spread wide in grotesque welcome, crucifixion style, ending in 3-fingered hands made of bundled twigs. The face was a burlap sack stitched with thick black thread in a crude approximation of features. 2 button eyes, large and mismatched, 1 green glass, 1 brown. The mouth was a ragged tear in the fabric, dark and gaping. A wide-brimmed hat, rotted and holed, crowned its head. Scraps of clothing hung from its frame. A tattered flannel shirt, remnants of overalls, all stained with substances Joshua didn't want to identify. It shouldn't exist. They'd burned it. Buried it. But here it stood on Halloween morning, surrounded by pumpkins that glowed despite the daylight, their interiors flickering with foxfire that cast dancing shadows across the dead field. And at its feet, bound with rope and gagged, was Nicole Harper. Joshua's training kicked in even as his gift screamed at him to run. He burst from the tree line, sprinting toward the scarecrow and its captive. "Nicole, hold on, The scarecrow's head turned. Not slowly, not with the creak of old wood, but with fluid speed like a predator spotting prey. The button eyes fixed on Joshua, and he felt the weight of its attention like a physical blow. Cold rushed through him, so intense it burned. The voices he'd lived with for 15 years erupted into a cacophony of screaming, dozens of them, hundreds maybe, All the people who'd vanished in Blackwood over the decades, all trapped somehow within or around this thing. Tom Chen's voice was among them. "Run, Josh, run before it's too..." The scarecrow moved. One moment it was stationary, arms spread wide, and the next it was lunging toward Joshua with impossible speed. Its twig fingers reached for him, stretching longer than they should, and Joshua threw himself sideways, hitting the ground hard and rolling. He came up with his service pistol drawn, stupid, useless, but instinct, and fired 3 shots center mass. The bullets punched through straw and burlap, exiting the scarecrow's back in puffs of dried grass. It didn't slow, didn't even acknowledge the impacts. It came at Joshua again, and this time he dove behind one of the jack-o'-lanterns. The moment he crossed the circle of pumpkins, the scarecrow stopped as if hitting an invisible wall. It stood at the boundary, swaying slightly, its head tilted at an unnatural angle. Watching. Joshua's breath came in ragged gasps. The pumpkins. The circle. Protection. Old Samhain tradition. Carved turnips and later pumpkins to ward off evil spirits, to mark safe ground. Whoever had placed these had known what they were doing, but they'd put them around the scarecrow, not around Joshua. A trap, not a ward. And Nicole Harper was inside the circle, just a few feet from where the creature stood. "Nicole!" Joshua shouted. "Can you move?" The young woman's eyes were wide with terror above the gag. She shook her head frantically. Joshua could see why. Her ankles were bound together, her hands tied behind her back. She'd been positioned there deliberately, bait for him. The realization hit Joshua like ice water. Nicole Harper hadn't just wandered off the trail and gotten lost. She'd been taken, placed here, used as bait to lure someone into the circle on Halloween. To lure him specifically, maybe, or any ranger who'd come searching. Someone who'd crossed the circle of protection to try to save her. The scarecrow seemed to sense his understanding. Its burlap mouth stretched wider, the rip in the fabric growing, and a sound emerged. Not quite laughter, not quite screaming, but something in between that made Joshua's teeth ache. Straw fell from its body as it moved, rustling across the dead grass, and its button eyes gleamed with malevolent intelligence. "Sarah," Joshua keyed his radio, not taking his eyes off the scarecrow. "Sarah, do you copy?" Static. No response. "Sarah, I'm at the Holloway farmstead. I've found Nicole Harper, but..." He paused. How did he explain this? How did he make anyone believe? "There's a situation. I need backup. All available rangers to my location. Armed. Bring..." What? What could possibly help against this thing? "Bring fire. Gasoline, flamethrowers, anything that burns." The radio crackled with static, but no voice emerged. Joshua checked the display. Full bars, but no connection. The scarecrow had done something to the frequencies. Or maybe it was simply Halloween. The veil thinning. Reality becoming unstable. Radio waves behaving strangely when the laws of physics took a back seat to older rules. He was on his own. The scarecrow began to move along the circle's edge, its impossible legs carrying it in a slow circuit around Nicole Harper. It was playing with him, Joshua realized. It knew he'd have to cross the circle eventually. Knew he couldn't leave Nicole to die. The creature had all day to wait. All day until sunset came and Halloween night proper began, when its power would be absolute. Joshua needed a plan. He needed to think like the old Celts, like his grandmother, like everyone who'd ever survived Samhain. The scarecrow couldn't cross the circle from inside. That meant the pumpkins were a two-way barrier, keeping it contained. Whoever had set this up had trapped it here, at least temporarily. But they'd also trapped Nicole, and once someone crossed the boundary to get her, unless... Joshua's mind raced. Salt, iron, traditional wards against evil spirits. He had a multi-tool on his belt, iron, or at least steel. And in his pack, in the first aid kit, there were saline solution packets. Not much, but maybe enough. He pulled out his multi-tool, opened the blade, and began scratching a smaller circle in the dirt around his position, reciting his grandmother's prayers under his breath. Dion mi adia, odrox spioradain. Dion mi onaim dian folekte. Protect me, God, from evil spirits. Protect me from hidden enemies." The words felt clumsy in his mouth. He'd never been particularly religious, but they also felt right. Ancient, weighted with power. The scarecrow stopped moving. Its head swiveled toward Joshua, and he felt its attention focus like a magnifying glass catching sunlight. The cold intensified. Joshua kept scratching, kept reciting, kept working. He emptied the saline packets along the circle's edge, the salty liquid soaking into the earth. When he was done, he stood and faced the scarecrow. "I'm coming for her," he said. "And you can't have either of us." The thing that had once been Silas Holloway's rage and blood didn't respond. It simply watched as Joshua stepped across his makeshift circle, sprinting toward Nicole Harper's position. The scarecrow lunged, its twig fingers reaching, but Joshua was faster. He grabbed Nicole, knife flashing as he cut her bonds, and they both threw themselves back toward his circle of protection. They didn't make it. The scarecrow's hand closed around Joshua's ankle, and the cold that burned through him was nothing like he'd ever experienced. It wasn't just physical cold. It was the cold of the grave, of frozen winter earth, of everything dead and buried clawing its way back to life. Joshua screamed, kicking, trying to pull free, but the grip was iron strong. Nicole Harper scrambled away, her hands finally free, tearing the gag from her mouth as she crawled toward Joshua's salt circle. "Help him!" she shrieked. "God, please help him!" The scarecrow began dragging Joshua toward its center position, toward the heart of the jack-o'-lantern circle. And Joshua understood finally what it wanted, what it had always wanted: a sacrifice, a ranger's life for its own continued existence. It had taken Tom Chen 5 years ago. It wanted Joshua Whitmore now. And it would take another in 5 years, and another 5 after that, feeding on those who protected the forest, consuming their lives to sustain its own unnatural animation. "No!" Joshua gasped. His free hand scrabbled at his belt, found the can of bear spray he always carried. It was a long shot, probably useless, but he was out of options. He flipped the safety and sprayed directly into the scarecrow's button eyes. The creature recoiled, releasing Joshua's ankle, not from pain, it couldn't feel pain, but from instinct, from the animal memories embedded in the blood and rage that animated it. Bear spray was capsaicin, pepper derivative, designed to trigger panic responses in mammals. The scarecrow had been human once, or human-made, and somewhere in its twisted construction those reflexes remained. Joshua scrambled backward, his ankle burning where the scarecrow had touched him, and collapsed inside his salt circle next to Nicole Harper. They both lay there, gasping, watching as the scarecrow recovered, shaking its burlap head like a dog shedding water. The bear spray had bought them seconds, nothing more. "What is that thing?" Nicole Harper's voice was raw, her eyes wild with terror. "Old evil," Joshua managed. "Silas Holloway's rage given form. It takes someone every Halloween, feeds on fear and pain." "How do we kill it?" "I don't know if we can." Joshua checked his watch, 10:23 a.m. Still morning, still daylight, but the shadows under the trees felt darker than they should. Halloween was pulling at reality, thinning the veil hour by hour. By sunset, the scarecrow would be at full power. By midnight, unstoppable. They needed help. They needed fire. They needed... A sound cut through the morning air. Singing. A child's voice, high and clear, carrying across the dead field from the direction of the forest. "Souling, souling, we've come a-souling, pray good mistress, a soul cake. An apple, a pear, a plum, or a cherry, or any good thing to make us all merry." Joshua's blood turned to ice. Souling. The old Halloween tradition, children going door to door asking for soul cakes in exchange for prayers for the dead. But there were no children in this remote part of Blackwood, no houses for miles. And the voice was wrong, not quite right, like a recording played at the wrong speed. 3 figures emerged from the tree line. Children, or things wearing children's shapes. They were dressed in vintage Halloween costumes, A ghost made from white sheets, a witch with a pointed hat, a devil with papier-mâché horns. But their faces, visible beneath masks and makeup, were gray and withered. Dead faces. Corpses animated by the thinning veil, called forth by the scarecrow's presence or simply drawn to the concentration of supernatural energy at the Holloway farmstead. They walked in formation toward the jack-o'-lantern circle, still singing in voices that warped and echoed. Behind them came more. A figure in a 1920s suit, its head twisted backward on its neck. A woman in a long dress, her face missing below the eyes. A man dressed as a ranger, and Joshua's heart stopped because it was Tom Chen, or what remained of him, his uniform torn and stained, his eyes empty holes. "The dead are walking," Joshua whispered. "It's not even noon, and the dead are walking." Nicole Harper clutched his arm. "What do we do?" The Revenant parade reached the circle's edge and stopped. 20, maybe 30 figures, all standing at the boundary of the jack-o'-lanterns, all facing inward. The Scarecrow stood among them, the tallest figure, its button eyes fixed on Joshua and Nicole. And then the Souling children spoke in unison, their voices a chorus of winter wind. Trick or treat. The jack-o'-lantern's foxfire flickered and died. All of them, all 30 pumpkins, their protective light extinguishing simultaneously. The circle was broken. The dead surged forward. Joshua grabbed Nicole, hauling her to her feet, and they ran. Back toward the forest, toward the tree line, anywhere away from the farmstead and its impossible horrors. Behind them, the souling song continued, growing louder, closer. "Souling, souling, we've come a souling, pray good mistress, your soul will take. A heart, a liver, lungs or entrails. Feed the hungry earth with your last exhale." They crashed through underbrush, branches whipping at their faces. Joshua's psychic sensitivity was overloaded, the voices of the dead hammering at his consciousness from all directions. He could feel them, dozens of spirits using the thinned veil to manifest, drawn to this place by the Scarecrow's power or simply emerging through tears in reality that Halloween opened every year. A root caught Joshua's foot, sending him sprawling. Nicole grabbed his jacket, trying to pull him up, but she was exhausted, her strength fading. The dead were closing in, their footsteps rustling through dry leaves, their breathing. Did they breathe? Rattling like wind through empty houses. A hand fell on Joshua's shoulder. He spun, fist raised, and found himself looking into Tom Chen's hollow eye sockets. "I'm sorry," Tom's voice emerged, dry and distant. "I couldn't warn you. It has me. It has all of us." "Tom, fight it." "Can't fight. Not on Samhain. The Scarecrow calls, we answer. It's been calling since Silas made it. Every Halloween it grows stronger. More souls, more power." Tom's head tilted at an unnatural angle. "You have to burn it, Josh. Burn it at midnight when the veil is thinnest. That's when it's most vulnerable. Fire blessed by Samhain bonfires, traditional flames. Otherwise, it'll just reform next year." "How? How do I get blessed fire?" But Tom was already turning away, pulled by the Scarecrow's will back toward the farmstead. The other dead followed, forming a procession back to the circle that no longer offered protection. They moved like puppets, limbs jerking on invisible strings. Joshua and Nicole lay in the underbrush, barely breathing, watching the dead retreat. When the last figure disappeared through the trees, Joshua helped Nicole to her feet. "We need to get to town," he said. "Get help, get supplies, get—" "It's 20 miles to town," Nicole interrupted. "Through the forest. We'd never make it before dark. And you heard what that ghost said. We have until midnight." She was right. Joshua checked his watch, 11:47 a.m. They had 12 hours until midnight. 12 hours to figure out how to destroy a creature that had survived for 67 years, that commanded the dead, that grew stronger with every minute the veil thinned. "Samhain bonfire," Joshua said slowly. "Traditional flames." That's what Tom said. "We need to build a proper Samhain bonfire." "Do you know how?" Joshua thought of his grandmother, of the stories she'd told of traditions passed down through generations of Scots and Irish immigrants who'd brought their Halloween knowledge to America. Maybe I remember enough. They needed supplies. They needed a safe location. They needed to survive until midnight while avoiding the Scarecrow and its army of the dead, and they needed to do it all on the one night of the year when the laws of reality bent, when the dead walked, when ancient evils woke and hunted. Halloween had only just begun. Joshua led Nicole Harper through the forest, away from the Holloway farmstead, toward a destination he hoped still existed. The old fire lookout tower on Raven's Peak, 3 miles north. It was stone and metal, defensible, and most importantly, it had supplies stored for emergencies, including gasoline and road flares. The journey should have taken an hour. It took 3. The forest was wrong, paths leading in circles, trees seeming to move when they weren't looking, and always the sense of being watched by dozens of eyes. The dead were still out there, circling, waiting for the Scarecrow's command. They reached the tower at 3:17 p.m., the sun already sinking toward the western mountains. The structure stood 70 feet tall, built in 1957 as a fire watch post, long since automated and abandoned. But the door was still there, heavy steel, and it was unlocked. "Why would anyone leave this unlocked?" Nicole asked. "Rangers come here sometimes," Joshua explained, climbing the spiral stairs. "Use it as an emergency shelter or rest stop. We keep basic supplies stocked." The observation room at the top was exactly as Joshua remembered. Small, maybe 15 feet square, windows on all sides providing 360-degree views of the forest. Shelves held emergency rations, first aid kits, blankets, a battery-powered radio, and in the corner, 5-gallon cans of gasoline and a box of road flares. Joshua immediately tried the radio. Static. Just like his handheld, something was interfering with communications. He wasn't surprised. The veil had been thinning all day, and now with sunset approaching, the supernatural was bleeding fully into the natural world. "Okay," he said, forcing himself to think clearly despite the exhaustion and fear. "We have maybe 3 hours until sunset, another 5 until midnight. We need to prepare." "Prepare how?" Nicole moved to the windows, staring out at the darkening forest. "That thing commands the dead. It's got an army. What can 2 people do? We follow tradition." Joshua pulled his phone from his pocket. No signal, but the Notes app still worked. He'd been documenting folk practices for years, interviews with locals, his grandmother's stories, research from books on Celtic traditions. He scrolled through looking for anything about Samhain bonfires. There, a note from 4 years ago, an interview with Mrs. Dunwood, an elderly woman in town whose family had come from County Cork in the 1890s. Proper Samhain bonfire must be built from 9 sacred woods: oak, hazel, apple, rowan, birch, ash, elder, willow, and thorn. Light it with 9 people's breath if you can, or make do with less if you must. Add offerings to the flames: grain from the harvest, first fruits, and herbs for cleansing. The bonfire guards against the AOC and burns away curses. On Samhain, when the fire burns bright, you can destroy things that shouldn't exist. Old Silas Holloway, may he rot, he'd have burned proper in a Samhain bonfire. Shame they used regular flames. Evil like that needs holy fire to put down. Joshua looked up at Nicole. "We need to build a Samhain bonfire, 9 sacred woods offering specific ritual. If we can lure the Scarecrow into those flames at midnight, when the veil is thinnest, the fire might actually destroy it permanently." 9 sacred woods? Where are we supposed to find those in the next few hours? They're all native to these mountains. Oak. We're surrounded by white oak. Hazel grows along streams. Apple, there's a wild orchard near the Holloway place, probably planted by Silas himself. The others... Joshua grabbed a park map from the shelf, spreading it across the floor. "We'd have to travel, hit multiple locations, gather enough wood to build a proper pyre, while avoiding an army of the dead." "Yes." Nicole was quiet for a moment, staring at the map. Then she nodded. "Okay, Tell me what we need to do." They planned it out. Joshua knew the forest better than anyone alive, knew where each type of tree grew, knew shortcuts and trails marked and unmarked. They'd have to move fast, gathering wood from different locations, returning to a central point to build the pyre. The Holloway farmstead itself seemed like the logical choice. The scarecrow would be drawn there anyway, and the cleared field provided space for a large bonfire. "We'll need offerings," Joshua said. "Grain, fruit, herbs." Nicole pointed to the emergency rations. "Granola bars? They're made with oats." "Not ideal, but it might work." And Joshua moved to the window, looking out at the forest canopy. "There's a meadow about half a mile south. Grows wild sage and juniper. That'll do for herbs." "And fruit?" "The apple orchard. We were heading there anyway for the apple wood." They gathered supplies. Backpacks filled with the gasoline cans. They'd need accelerant to get the fire burning hot enough. Road flares for ignition. The emergency rations for offerings. A hatchet from the tool locker for cutting wood. And Joshua's multi-tool, because iron was traditional protection against evil spirits. By 4:30 p.m., they were ready. The sun was sinking fast now, painting the forest in shades of orange and gold. Beautiful and terrible at once. Halloween sunset, the moment when Samhain truly began. "We should move," Joshua said. "Once it's full dark, the dead will be everywhere." They descended the tower and struck out south toward the meadow. The forest was quiet, too quiet, and Joshua's gift screamed at him that they were being watched. The dead were out there, he could feel them, but they weren't attacking. Waiting for orders, maybe. Or waiting for full nightfall when their power would peak. The meadow appeared through the trees, a clearing about an acre across, filled with wild sage bushes and clusters of juniper. Joshua and Nicole quickly gathered armfuls of the herbs, stuffing them into their packs. The sage smelled sharp and clean, almost medicinal. Traditional cleansing herb, his grandmother had said. Burns away evil and confusion. They were about to leave when Joshua saw it. Another jack-o'-lantern sitting at the meadow's edge. Its carved face leered at them in the fading light. "It's marking us," Nicole whispered. "Tracking us." "Then we need to move faster." Joshua started toward the next location, a stream 2 miles east where hazel grew. But something made him stop. A feeling, a premonition, his gift screaming danger. He turned slowly, scanning the meadow. They weren't alone. The Souling children stood at the meadow's perimeter, arranged in a circle around the clearing. Still wearing their vintage costumes, still singing in their wrong speed voices. "Trick or treat, smell our feet. Give us something good to eat. If you don't, we don't care, we'll take your souls and leave them bare." Nicole clutched Joshua's arm. "Can we run?" "Not fast enough." The children were closing in, walking in synchronized steps, forming a tightening noose. "We need iron, salt, something to ward them off." Joshua fumbled for his multi-tool, holding the iron blade out like a talisman. The children hesitated at the sight of it, their dead eyes flickering with something like fear. Iron repelled the fairy folk, and these were spirits using borrowed forms, not truly alive. But there were more of them than there were blades. And behind the children, other figures emerged from the trees. The adult dead, shambling forward, their eyes empty, their hands reaching. "We're surrounded," Nicole said. Joshua's mind raced. Sage. Burning sage. He pulled a bundle of the herb from his pack, dug out a road flare, and struck it to life. The brilliant red flame hissed to life, and he touched it to the sage. The herb caught immediately, sending up thick white smoke that smelled sharp and clean. "Purifying smoke," Joshua shouted, waving the burning sage. "Traditional Samhain protection against hostile spirits." The dead recoiled from the smoke. Not far, just a step or two, but it was enough. Joshua grabbed Nicole's hand and they ran, trailing sage smoke behind them, the dead parting reluctantly before the cleansing flame. They burst from the meadow into the forest beyond, still running, the sage burning down in Joshua's hand. Behind them, the souling song faded, replaced by a different sound. Rustling. the sound of something large moving through vegetation, stalks bending and breaking. The scarecrow was coming, drawn by their presence, their fear, their defiance. "The stream," Joshua gasped. "We need to reach the stream. Running water." Another traditional barrier. They crashed through underbrush, stumbling over roots, branches whipping at their faces. Joshua's ankle, the one the scarecrow had grabbed, throbbed with every step, the flesh feeling frostbitten despite the mild October air. His breath came in ragged gasps, and beside him Nicole Harper was flagging, her exhaustion evident. The stream appeared ahead, a ribbon of silver in the growing darkness. Joshua and Nicole splashed into it, the water shockingly cold, and waded upstream. Behind them the rustling stopped at the water's edge. The scarecrow stood there, a dark silhouette against the twilight forest, unmoving. Watching. It couldn't cross running water, not until midnight when its power would be absolute. They'd bought themselves time. Joshua and Nicole collapsed on the far bank, soaking wet and shaking. Full darkness was minutes away now. Above them, stars were beginning to appear, and Joshua recognized the constellation, Scorpius, associated with death and the underworld, appropriate for Samhain. "We need the Hazelwood," Joshua forced himself to stand. "Then the apple orchard. Then we build the fire and wait for midnight." The next 3 hours were a blur of desperate scavenging. Hazelwood from the stream bank, cut with shaking hands. Oak from ancient trees deep in the forest. Rowan from a grove on the ridge. Each type of wood found and gathered while avoiding the patrols of the dead that shambled through the darkening forest. By 8:45 p.m., they had everything except the apple wood. And to get that, they'd have to return to the Holloway farmstead, to the orchard planted by Silas himself 67 years ago. "It's a trap," Nicole said as they stood at the forest's edge, looking out at the farmstead. "It knows we need apple wood. It'll be waiting." "Probably." Joshua adjusted the pack on his shoulders, heavy with wood and gasoline cans. "But we don't have a choice." The moon was rising now, a waning crescent, thin and sharp as a knife. "Perfect for Samhain," his grandmother had said. The dark moon, when the veil was thinnest. They approached the orchard carefully, moving between the gnarled trees. Apples hung from branches, withered and diseased, inedible. Nothing had thrived on Holloway land since Silas's death. The place was cursed, poisoned by the rage that had given birth to the scarecrow. Joshua found a suitable tree and began hacking at a low branch with his hatchet. The wood was hard, resistant, and each impact sent jolts through his injured ankle. Beside him, Nicole kept watch, her eyes scanning the darkness. "Joshua," she whispered, "it's here." The scarecrow stood at the orchard's edge, 10 feet tall, button eyes gleaming in the moonlight. It didn't move, didn't speak, just watched as Joshua frantically cut the apple branch free. The wood finally separated with a crack, and Joshua grabbed it, ready to run. But the scarecrow wasn't alone. The dead surrounded the orchard, hundreds of them now, everyone who'd vanished in Blackwood over the decades, all called forth by the thinning veil and the scarecrow's power. They stood in silent ranks, blocking every exit. "We can't fight them all," Nicole said. "We don't have to." Joshua pulled a gasoline can from his pack, unscrewed the cap. "We just have to make them afraid." He doused the ground in a circle around their position, emptying the entire 5 gallons. Then he pulled out a road flare, struck it to life, and dropped it onto the gasoline. Flame erupted in a perfect ring, 6 feet high, roaring and spitting. The dead recoiled, crying out in voices that were wind and creaking branches. Fire, the great purifier, destroyer of unnatural things. Even the scarecrow stepped back, its straw body all too flammable. "Now we run." Joshua grabbed Nicole's hand. "Through the fire. It won't hurt us, it's protecting us." They plunged through the flames. Joshua felt the heat wash over him, intense but not burning, as if the fire recognized them as living, as belonging to the natural world. They emerged on the other side, still running, and the dead didn't follow. couldn't follow. The flames acted as a barrier, keeping the supernatural at bay. Joshua and Nicole ran until they reached the center of the Holloway field, where the jack-o'-lantern circle had been. The pumpkins were gone, scattered or dissolved, but the space remained, a clearing in the overgrown field. This was where they'd make their stand. "Start gathering the wood," Joshua instructed. "We need to build the pyre." They worked feverishly, constructing a cone of wood in the center of the clearing. Oak for strength, hazel for wisdom, apple for immortality, rowan for protection, ash for connection between worlds, birch for new beginnings, elder for transformation, willow for death and rebirth, thorn for sacrifice. 9 sacred woods, carefully arranged, each piece placed with intention. Around the pyre, Joshua created a circle using the remaining gasoline, a barrier of potential flame. They had 3 road flares left, enough to ignite the bonfire when the moment came. Joshua checked his watch. 11:23 p.m., 37 minutes until midnight. 37 minutes until Samhain reached its peak, when the veil would tear completely and anything would be possible. The dead began gathering at the clearing's edge, drawn by the pyre, by the living flesh of Joshua and Nicole, by the Scarecrow's will. They stood in ranks, hundreds strong, all the missing of Blackwood Forest. Men, women, children, rangers, hikers, hunters, all consumed by the Scarecrow over decades of Halloween nights. And at their center, towering over them all, stood the creature of straw and rage and blood. Silas Holloway's final curse, given form and hunger. "It's time," the Scarecrow spoke, its voice like wind through dry stalks. "Time to join us. Time to feed the field. Time to pay the harvest debt." "No," Joshua stepped forward. "Your time is ending. Tonight on Samhain, we're going to burn you the way you should have been burned 67 years ago." The Scarecrow's button eyes fixed on the pyre. "You think your fire can harm me? Ordinary flames failed. I am beyond death, beyond ending. This isn't ordinary flame." Joshua held up the bundles of sage, the emergency ration packets filled with grain, a withered apple from the orchard. "This is Samhain fire, built with 9 sacred woods, blessed with traditional offerings. When midnight comes and the veil tears completely, this fire will burn with the power of the IOC themselves. It will burn away everything unnatural, everything that doesn't belong in this world." "You don't have 9 people to breathe life into it," the Scarecrow said. "The ritual is incomplete." Joshua felt his stomach drop. He'd forgotten that part. 9 people to breathe life into the Samhain bonfire. He and Nicole were only 2. They were missing 7. But then, from the ranks of the dead, 7 figures stepped forward. Tom Chen, deputy marshal from 5 years ago, and 6 others, wearing ranger uniforms from different eras, faces gaunt but recognizable from memorial photos Joshua had seen over the years. Rangers who'd vanished on Halloween, whose bodies had never been found. Tom spoke, his hollow voice carrying across the field. "We're still here, Josh. Trapped, but not gone. We can help. We can breathe life into the fire one last time, free ourselves, and end this thing." The Scarecrow shrieked, a sound like tearing metal. "They are mine. My harvest, my power." "They were yours," Joshua said. "But on Samhain, the dead have choices. The veil works both ways. They can cross back to the light, if we give them the chance." He turned to Tom and the other dead rangers. "You'll have to resist its control. Hold on until midnight. Can you do that?" Tom nodded slowly. "We've been holding on for years, waiting, knowing someday someone would try to end this. We can hold a few more minutes." Joshua checked his watch, 11:51 p.m., 9 minutes until midnight. "Form the circle," he instructed. "Nicole, me, and the 7 rangers. Stand around the pyre. When I give the word, we all breathe onto the wood, give it our living essence." They arranged themselves, the 9 of them forming a ring around the sacred wood construction. The Scarecrow and its army of dead watched, pressing closer, but not yet attacking. The creature knew something was happening. something that might threaten it, but it was confident in its power, confident that when midnight struck and its strength peaked, no mortal fire could harm it. Joshua placed the offerings onto the pyre, granola bars for grain, the withered apple for fruit, sage and juniper for purifying herbs, everything the tradition required, improvised but heartfelt. The watch on his wrist showed 11:58 p.m., 2 minutes. "When I light the flares," Joshua said to the circle, "we breathe together, 3 times in unison. Put everything you have into it, your hope, your will, your determination to end this curse." He struck the first flare. It hissed to life, brilliant red. He touched it to the base of the pyre. The wood caught immediately, flames spreading with unnatural speed, racing up through the 9 sacred woods. He struck the second flare, touched it to another side. Then the third, completing the triangle of ignition. 11:59 p.m. "Now," Joshua said, "breathe." The 9 of them, 2 living, 7 dead, breathed onto the growing flames. Joshua felt something flow out of him, something more than air. His intention, his will, his desperate need for this to work. Beside him, Nicole did the same, and the dead rangers, fighting against the Scarecrow's control with the last fragments of their trapped souls, breathed with them. The fire surged, flames turning from red-orange to white-hot, then to blue, then to colors Joshua had no names for, colors that existed only on Samhain when the veil was torn and the impossible bled through. "Again!" Joshua shouted. "Second breath!" They breathed as one, and the Samhain bonfire roared toward the sky, 20 feet high, 30, higher than any natural flame could sustain. The heat was intense, but didn't burn them. It recognized them as the fire's creators, as those who belonged in the living world. Midnight struck. Joshua felt it like a physical blow, reality shuddering, the veil tearing completely. For one moment, one eternal instant, the world of the dead and the world of the living occupied the same space. Ghosts walked solid. The living could see beyond the mortal realm, and the Samhain bonfire burned with power drawn from both worlds at once. "Third breath," Joshua commanded. "End this." They breathed, and the fire exploded outward, a wall of sacred flame racing across the Holloway field. It consumed everything unnatural, the dead who'd been bound there, releasing them to whatever lay beyond. It burned away the curse that had poisoned the land. And it raced toward the Scarecrow, which stood at the field's edge, no longer confident, no longer mocking, but finally afraid. The creature tried to run, but the fire was faster. It caught the Scarecrow's straw body, ignited it, and the thing that had been Silas Holloway's rage screamed as it burned. The flames were merciless, consuming straw and burlap and wood and the dark magic that had animated them all. The Scarecrow thrashed, trying to tear itself apart, trying to shed its burning components, but the Samhain fire wouldn't be denied. It burned and burned and burned, until nothing remained but ashes scattered across the Holloway field. The dead rangers smiled as the fire took them too, releasing them at last. Tom Chen's ghost caught Joshua's eye one final time, nodded in gratitude, and dissolved into light that streamed upward toward the stars. The wall of sacred flame collapsed inward, returning to the pyre, which settled into a normal bonfire, still large, still hot, but no longer impossibly bright. The veil began to close, reality reasserting itself, Samhain's peak moment passing. Joshua and Nicole stood in the center of the Holloway field, surrounded by a ring of fire that crackled and popped as it consumed the 9 sacred woods. Around them, the forest was silent. No dead walked. No malevolent presence lurked. For the first time in 67 years, Halloween night in Blackwood Forest was just a night. "Is it over?" Nicole asked. "Yes," Joshua said, and felt the truth of it through his gift. The voices were quiet. The cold presence that had haunted this place was gone. "It's over." They tended the fire until dawn, keeping watch, making sure nothing rose from the Scarecrow's ashes. As the sun crept over the eastern mountains, painting the forest gold and green and alive, Joshua's radio suddenly crackled to life. Whitmore, do you copy? Sarah's voice, frantic with worry. Josh, we've been trying to reach you all night. Where are you? I'm here, Sarah. Holloway Farmstead. We found Nicole Harper. She's safe. Joshua looked at the ashes scattered across the field, at the dying Samhain bonfire, at the forest that somehow felt lighter, cleaner, free of the curse that had plagued it for decades. And I think we finally solved the Halloween disappearances. What happened out there? Joshua exchanged glances with Nicole Harper, who looked exhausted, but alive, so wonderfully alive. How did they explain this? How did they make anyone believe? Long story. Joshua finally said, "We'll tell you everything when we get back. But Sarah, next Halloween, we're going to build a proper Samhain bonfire on the Holloway property. Make it an annual tradition. Keep the veil stable, honor the dead properly. Make sure nothing like this ever happens again." Okay, Josh. Whatever you need. Just get yourselves back to the station safely. They hiked out as the sun rose higher, leaving the Holloway farmstead behind. Joshua looked back once at the field where the scarecrow had stood, where generations of missing people had been trapped, where a farmer's rage had spawned a monster. The field was empty now, just dead grass and autumn flowers beginning to reclaim the space. In a few years, you'd never know anything terrible had happened there. But Joshua would remember. Every Halloween for the rest of his life, he'd remember the night he and Nicole Harper survived Samhain, defeated a curse, and learned that some traditions existed for good reason. The veil between worlds would thin every October 31st. The dead would always press close on Halloween night. But now, at least in Blackwood Forest, the living had pushed back, had reclaimed the night, had proven that with knowledge, courage, and respect for old traditions, even the darkest magic could be overcome. Joshua Whitmore would work 19 more Halloweens before retiring. Each one he'd build a Samhain bonfire in the Holloway field, using the 9 sacred woods, making the offerings, breathing life into flames that kept the veil stable and honored the dead properly. Other rangers joined the tradition and then townspeople, until it became an annual celebration. The Blackwood Halloween Bonfire, they called it. A community gathering where people remembered those who'd been lost, told old stories, and kept the ancient traditions alive. And in all those years, in all those Halloweens, not a single person disappeared from Blackwood Forest. The scarecrow never rose again. I hope this Halloween tale has haunted you appropriately. If you enjoyed this supernatural terror, what moment unsettled you most? The jack-o'-lantern trail? The souling children? The midnight confrontation with the scarecrow? Share your thoughts, and may your own Halloween night remain safely on the living side of the veil. Happy Halloween. The October sun hung low over the Great Smoky Mountains, bleeding crimson through the ancient trees of the Cherokee National Forest, as James Morrison checked his radio for the 3rd time in as many minutes. Static crackled back at him, the same empty hiss that had been his only companion for the past hour. Halloween 2015 was settling over the forest like a shroud, and somewhere in these darkening woods, Jessica Campbell had vanished. James pressed the radio's call button again. "Base, this is Ranger Morrison. Still no sign of the missing hiker. Approaching the old McCreary settlement site." He released the button and waited. Nothing but static answered. He glanced at his watch. 5:47 p.m. The sun would be gone in 20 minutes, and with it, any hope of an easy search. His phone buzzed in his pocket, a text from his wife, Sarah. "Kids want to know when you'll be home for trick-or-treating." Emma's upset. His jaw tightened. Emma was 7, and this was supposed to be the first Halloween he'd actually be home to take her and his son Michael around the neighborhood. 4 years of working this job. 4 years of missing Halloween because someone always got lost or hurt on October 31st, thinking the mountains were just another backdrop for their holiday adventures. But this year was supposed to be different. This year, the new ranger, Patterson, was supposed to handle Halloween duty while James finally kept his promise to his daughter. Then Patterson's mother had her stroke that morning, and James had volunteered to cover. What else could he do? And now, at 5:47 on Halloween evening, 23-year-old Jessica Campbell was somewhere in these woods, and James's own children were 6 miles away, waiting for a father who might not make it home before the dead of night. He'd found Jessica's car at the Old Settlers Trail trailhead at 4:15, 2 hours after her roommate reported her missing. The vehicle was locked, her purse still inside, phone dead, but her day pack was gone, and so was she. The trail led deep into the forest, past the historic McCreary homestead where Scots-Irish settlers had lived in the 1800s, bringing their old country traditions to these New World mountains. James knew the area well, too well. He knew what the old-timers said about this place, especially on Halloween. The wind picked up as he walked, carrying the scent of wood smoke and something else, something that made the hair on his neck stand up. Fallen leaves swirled around his boots in patterns that seemed almost deliberate, almost purposeful. He'd been a ranger for 12 years, had worked in these mountains for most of his adult life, and he'd never quite shaken the feeling that the Smokies remembered things, held grudges, kept secrets in their ancient hollows and forgotten coves. Ahead, through the trees, he could see the clearing where the McCreary settlement had once stood. Only one structure remained, the old stone chimney of the main house, rising like a broken tooth from the earth, and there in the center of the clearing something that made James's blood run cold. The bonfire. Every year on Halloween, the local historical society built a traditional Samhain bonfire at the old McCreary site. It was supposed to be a celebration of the Scots-Irish heritage of the area, a recognition of the ancient Celtic festival that had become Halloween. The bonfire would be lit at dusk by the society's president, old Thomas Brennan, who took the tradition seriously. Too seriously, some said. He'd researched the old rituals, the authentic practices, insisted on doing things the proper way. The fire was meant to be a ward, a protection, a barrier between the world of the living and the realm of the dead that the Celts believed drew closest on this night. But as James emerged into the clearing, he saw immediately that something was wrong. The bonfire had been built. He could see the careful pyramid of wood, the traditional bone char markings around its base, the rowan branches woven into the structure for protection. But it had been destroyed. Logs lay scattered across the clearing, thrown 20 feet or more from their original position. The protective circle of salt that should have surrounded the pile had been scuffed away, ground into the dirt. And in the center of it all, where the heart of the fire should have been, someone had spray-painted a symbol James didn't recognize. Something that looked like a Celtic knot, twisted wrong, corrupted, inverted. Jesus Christ, James breathed. His radio crackled to life, making him jump. Morrison, this is Base. We've got a problem. It was Sharon, the dispatcher, and her voice carried an edge of panic he'd never heard before. Go ahead, Base. Thomas Brennan just called. Said someone vandalized the bonfire site. He's on his way up there now, said under no circumstances should anyone be in that area after dark. James. He sounded scared. Really scared. He kept saying something about the barrier being broken, about it being too late to... Static swallowed her words. Base, repeat. You're breaking up. More static then. Don't let anyone near that clearing after sunset. The ritual, James, the protection ritual has been... The radio went dead completely. James stared at the destroyed bonfire, at the malevolent symbol painted at its heart, and felt something cold settle in his gut. The temperature had dropped at least 10 degrees since he'd entered the clearing. His breath misted in front of his face. It was too cold for late October, even in the mountains. Wrong cold. Unnatural cold. And then he saw the pumpkin. It sat at the base of the old chimney, a jack-o'-lantern carved with a leering face, candle already lit inside despite the fact that no one should have been here. The light flickered, casting dancing shadows across the stones. James approached slowly, every instinct screaming at him to leave, to get out of the clearing, to run back to his truck and call for backup. But Jessica was out here somewhere, and he was a father himself. And someone else's daughter was lost in these woods on the night when, according to legend, the dead walked free. He was 3 feet from the pumpkin when he heard it. Hoofbeats. Distant at first, so faint he thought he might be imagining them. But they grew louder, closer, the rhythmic thunder of a horse galloping hard through the forest. Impossible. There were no horses allowed in this section of the park, and the terrain was too rough for riding anyway. But the sound grew clearer, accompanied now by something else. A wind that seemed to come from all directions at once, carrying voices, whispers, the sound of things that shouldn't be. The sun touched the horizon, and the world changed. The temperature plummeted. The wind became a gale, tearing at James's jacket, pulling at his hair. The jack-o'-lantern's flame turned from orange to a sick greenish blue, and in its light James saw them. Figures emerging from the tree line. Dozens of them, scores, people in old-fashioned clothes, faces pale and expressionless, moving with the jerky gait of marionettes. Some he recognized or thought he did. Old Man Henderson, who died of hypothermia in these woods 3 winters ago. The Miller girl, the teenager who'd fallen from Clifftop last April. Others older, much older, their clothes dating back decades, generations, all moving toward the clearing, toward the destroyed bonfire, toward him. James's hand went to his radio, but he knew before he tried that it wouldn't work. Some part of him, some ancient inherited instinct understood what was happening. The barrier had been broken. The ward had failed. On this night, when the veil between worlds grew thin, the protection that had held for over a century had been shattered, and now the dead were coming home. He ran. James crashed through the underbrush, his flashlight beam jerking wildly as he fled the clearing. Behind him, the hoofbeats grew thunderous, echoing impossibly through the trees. The dead followed, silent except for the whisper of their feet through fallen leaves. He could hear his own breathing, harsh and panicked, and under it all a new sound, a horn, deep and mournful, the kind ancient hunters might have used, calling, calling, calling. His foot caught a root and he went down hard, flashlight spinning away into the darkness. For a moment he lay there gasping and heard his phone buzzing in his pocket. With shaking hands he pulled it out. Sarah, calling to ask where he was, why he wasn't home, why Emma was crying because Daddy had broken his promise again. He didn't answer. Couldn't. Because as he lifted his head, he saw it. The horse came through the trees like a nightmare-given form. It was massive, black as the spaces between stars, eyes glowing with the same sickish green light as the jack-o'-lantern. Smoke rose from its nostrils. Its hooves struck the ground with the sound of shattering tombstones. And on its back, sitting tall in an antique saddle, was the rider, the Dullahan. James had heard the stories, of course. Old Thomas Brennan told them every year at the bonfire lighting, making sure everyone understood why the ritual mattered, why the protection had to be maintained. The Dullahan, the headless horseman of Celtic legend, the herald of death who rode on Samhain to claim the souls of those marked for the other world. Brennan had always insisted the traditions weren't just folklore, weren't just quaint customs preserved for tourists. He'd begged the Park Service to take them seriously, to understand that the bonfire wasn't entertainment, it was necessity. James had smiled and nodded and never believed a word. Now, staring up at the figure on the black horse, at the rider who held his own severed head in the crook of one arm like a lantern, James believed everything. The head's eyes opened, glowing, green, fixed on James with the attention of a predator selecting prey. Not yet, the Dullahan said, and its voice was the sound of earth falling on coffin lids. Not you, not tonight, but the girl. The girl is marked. The girl opened the way. Jessica? James heard himself say. You have Jessica? The rider's lips, on the severed head, smiling now, curved into something that might have been amusement. We have many. Tonight we have them all. The barrier is broken. The way is open. We take what was promised, what was denied, what is owed. The horse reared and James scrambled backward. His hand found his flashlight, and without thinking he swung it at the horse's legs. The beam passed through them like they were made of smoke. The Dullahan laughed, a sound like wind through gravestones, and wheeled the horse around. Find the girl, it said. Find her before midnight, before the veil is fully torn. Find her, and perhaps your own children will see the dawn. Then it was gone, galloping away through the trees, the hoofbeats fading but never quite disappearing. James lay in the dirt, his heart hammering, his mind refusing to process what he'd just seen. His phone buzzed again. Another text from Sarah. "James, where are you? Something's wrong. The neighborhood kids are acting strange. They're just standing in the street, staring at our house. Please come home." His hands shook as he typed, "Lock the doors. All of them. Don't let anyone in. I don't care if they're kids or neighbors or anyone. Lock everything and keep the kids inside. I'll explain later. Please, Sarah. Please trust me." He forced himself to his feet. The dead were still coming through the trees, an endless procession moving toward the clearing, toward the broken ward, toward whatever awaited them there. But they ignored him now, flowing around him like water around a stone. He wasn't what they wanted. Not yet. Jessica was. James started to run again, this time with purpose. If the Dullahan was telling the truth, and some deep, terror-stricken part of him knew it was, then Jessica had somehow been involved in breaking the bonfire ward. Whether deliberately or accidentally, she'd torn open the barrier, and now she was marked, claimed, scheduled for collection before the clock struck midnight and Halloween turned to November. He had to find her, had to save her, because if the creature's words were true, if it could reach his family, his children, if they were somehow at risk because of what was happening here. The thought drove him forward through the darkness. His flashlight cut a narrow tunnel through the black, illuminating twisted branches and grasping undergrowth. The forest had never felt like this before, not in 12 years of night patrols and emergency rescues. It felt aware, awake, watching, and everywhere the dead were walking. He saw them between the trees, moving with purpose toward some destination he couldn't see. Some were recent, clothes from the 2000s, faces he half recognized from missing person reports. Others were older, much older, a woman in a calico dress from the 1800s, a man in a Union Army uniform, a child in clothes that might have been from the 1920s, face pale and eyes empty. None of them looked at him. They had somewhere to be, something to do. And James Morrison, living and breathing and terrified, was not their concern. The hoofbeats came again, closer this time, and James dove behind a massive oak, pressing himself against the bark. The Dullahan passed within 10 feet of him, its headless body somehow navigating the forest with perfect ease. The severed head, held high, illuminated the path with its sickly glow, and behind the horse, following like a funeral procession, came more of the dead. These ones different from the shambling figures he'd seen before. These moved with purpose, with hunger, with need. When they passed, James emerged from hiding and kept moving. He had no plan, no idea where Jessica might be. But he knew these woods, knew every trail and stream and clearing. If she was here, if she was still alive, still human, he'd find her. His radio crackled unexpectedly. "Morrison, if you can hear, the girl knows what she did, has to reverse before midnight. The ritual." Thomas Brennan's voice barely audible through the static. "Only one marked can undo, only one who opened the way. Find her, make her." The transmission died. James grabbed the radio. "Brennan, Thomas, what does she need to do? How do we fix this?" Static. Then, faintly, "Bonfire. Must be lit properly. Salt circle restored. Offering made. But she has to do it. Has to, willingly, or the Dullahan takes her, takes them all." "All? What do you mean all?" "Everyone the dead have claimed. Everyone marked, including..." The radio went dead again, but James didn't need to hear the rest. "Including his family, including Emma and Michael and Sarah." The Dullahan's words came back to him. "Perhaps your own children will see the dawn." They were marked, all of them, because James had failed to keep his promise, failed to be home, failed to protect them from whatever forces had been unleashed when the bonfire ward was broken. He started running again, faster now, desperate. The trail ahead showed signs of recent passage, broken twigs, disturbed leaves. Someone had come this way. He followed the signs, hope and terror warring in his chest. The hoofbeats continued to echo through the forest, sometimes close, sometimes distant, never quite fading. The Dullahan was hunting, searching, claiming the souls it had been promised. A scream split the night. Female, young, ahead and to the left. James sprinted toward it, crashing through brush that tore at his jacket and face. He burst into a small hollow and found her. Jessica Campbell sat huddled against a fallen log, her face streaked with tears and dirt. Her eyes were wide with terror, and when she saw James, she lunged toward him. Oh God, you have to help me. There's something out there, something following me. I can hear it, I can hear. Jessica. James grabbed her shoulders. Listen to me. What did you do at the bonfire site? She stared at him, confusion mixing with fear. What? I don't... The bonfire at the old McCreary settlement. Did you go there? Did you touch anything, break anything? Her face changed, became defensive. I didn't mean to. I was just taking pictures. It was for my art project about abandoned places and forgotten traditions. There was this weird wooden structure, and I thought it would make a cool photo, so I climbed on it to get a better angle, and it collapsed. I tried to fix it, but then I heard someone coming and I panicked and ran. I didn't think it was a big deal, it was just some old wood pile. James felt his blood turn to ice. Did you disturb the salt circle around it? There was salt on the ground, yeah. I brushed some of it aside when I was trying to put the wood back, and there was this symbol painted in the dirt. It looked neat, so I traced over it with spray paint I had in my pack to make it show up better in photos. Why? What's happening? What are those things in the forest? Before James could answer, the hoofbeats came again, much closer. The temperature dropped another 10 degrees. Frost formed on the fallen leaves, glittering in the starlight. Jessica saw it and went rigid with terror. It's coming for me, she whispered. I've seen it. 3 times now, a horse, a rider, something wrong with both of them. It keeps calling my name. It says I'm marked. It says I opened the way, and now I owe... You do, James cut her off. You broke a protection ward, a real one. Tonight is Halloween Samhain, the night when the boundary between the living and the dead grows thin. That bonfire was meant to keep it closed, to keep them on their side. You opened it, and now the dead are walking, and the Dullahan, that rider you saw, has come to collect souls, starting with yours. Jessica's face went white. That's insane. That's folklore. That's... Look around you. James grabbed her arm and pointed. Through the trees, the dead were visible, an endless parade of spirits moving through the forest. Does that look like folklore to you? She stared, her mouth opening and closing soundlessly. Then, oh my God, what did I do? Something that can be fixed, James said, hoping it was true. But you have to help. We have to get back to the bonfire site. We have to rebuild it properly, restore the salt circle, light it the right way, before midnight, before the veil tears completely open. And if we don't? James thought of his children, standing in their Halloween costumes, waiting for a father who might never come home. He thought of Sarah, locking the doors against things that didn't care about locks. He thought of the Dullahan's promise. Perhaps your own children will see the dawn. Then a lot of people die, he said quietly, including my family. Jessica looked at him, really looked at him, and something in his face must have convinced her. She nodded. Okay. Tell me what to do. They started back toward the clearing, moving as quickly as they dared. The forest had become a maze of the dead, spirits crossing their path at every turn. Most ignored them, but some paused, turned, watched with empty eyes. James kept Jessica close, his flashlight sweeping the path ahead. His watch read 8:47 p.m., 3 hours and 13 minutes until midnight. The hoofbeats came again, and this time they didn't fade. They grew louder, closer, accompanied by the blast of that mournful horn. The Dullahan was no longer hunting. It was herding, driving them toward something. They burst into another clearing, not the bonfire site, somewhere else, and found themselves surrounded. The dead formed a circle around them, 3 deep, blocking every exit. And there, at the far edge of the clearing, the Dullahan sat motionless on its black horse, the severed head raised high, eyes blazing green. "The girl comes willingly," the rider said. The girl opened the way. "The girl is owed." "No." James stepped in front of Jessica. "She didn't know. She made a mistake. She'll fix it. She'll restore the ward." The head tilted, curious. "And if she does? If she repairs what she broke?" "The dead have been called. The veil has been torn. They will not go quietly back to their graves, Ranger. They have tasted life again. They have crossed over. And tonight they are owed." "Owed what?" James demanded. 7 souls, the Dullahan replied. 7 for the 7 years since the last proper offering. 7 to satisfy the debt. 7 to seal the way. The girl is 1. 6 others must be marked, must be claimed before the dawn. James felt his stomach drop. "My family. Your family stands at a threshold this night. Your daughter wears a mask, and masks have power on Samhain. Your son carries sweets, and offerings matter. Your wife has lit jack-o'-lanterns, and lights call the dead. Yes, your family has been seen, has been marked, will be claimed. Unless?" The Dullahan smiled, the severed head's lips curling in gruesome amusement. "Unless the debt is paid another way, unless the ward is restored by the one who broke it with proper offering, proper ritual, proper sacrifice. But the girl must choose, must give willingly, must offer what is required." "What's required?" Jessica's voice, barely a whisper. "Blood," the rider said simply. "Life, yours or another's. A piece of your future, your mortality, something that matters, something that costs. That is how wards are sealed. That is how debts are paid." James turned to Jessica. In the green light cast by the Dullahan's head, she looked young, terrified, barely more than a child herself. He thought of Emma, 7 years old, waiting for her father. He thought of Michael, only 5, too young to understand why Daddy wasn't home. He thought of Sarah, trying to protect them from things she couldn't see, couldn't fight, couldn't comprehend. "What do I have to do?" Jessica asked, and her voice was steadier than James would have expected. The Dullahan gestured with its free hand toward the east. "Return to the clearing, rebuild the bonfire, walk the circle sunwise 3 times. Speak the old words. The ranger knows them. The old man Brennan has spoken them every year for decades. Light the fire with your own blood. Feed it a piece of yourself. Hair, bone, breath, years. Something that cannot be taken back. Do this, and the ward will hold. Do this, and the dead will return to their rest. Do this, and the debt will be paid. And if I don't, then I take you at midnight, and I take 6 others, and the veil remains torn until another Samhain comes, and 7 more souls are owed, and so on until the world itself grows thin and the dead walk every night. Not just this one." Jessica looked at James. "Your family. I can't ask you to—" "You're not asking, I'm offering." She turned back to the Dullahan. "I'll do it. I'll pay the debt. Just tell me what to say." The rider inclined its headless body in something that might have been respect. The severed head's eyes dimmed slightly. "Then go. Rebuild what you destroyed. Restore what you broke. And know that the offering you make tonight will mark you for the rest of your days. The dead will remember. The veil will remember. And when your time comes, when it truly comes, we will remember too." The circle of dead parted, creating a path toward the east. James and Jessica ran. They reached the bonfire clearing at 10:15 p.m. Less than 2 hours until midnight. The wind had risen to a gale, tearing at their clothes and hair. The temperature had dropped below freezing. The destroyed bonfire looked even worse than before, the wood scattered and broken, the protective symbols defaced and corrupted. "We'll never rebuild this in time," Jessica said, despair creeping into her voice. But as she spoke, figures emerged from the forest. The dead, dozens of them carrying wood. They moved silently, purposefully, rebuilding the bonfire with eerie efficiency. Logs were lifted and placed. Branches were woven. The pyramid took shape again, faster than seemed possible. "They're helping," James breathed. "Not helping," a voice said behind them. They turned to find Thomas Brennan, the old Historical Society president, standing at the edge of the clearing. His face was pale, his eyes haunted. "Fulfilling. They want the ward restored as much as we do. Most of them didn't choose to walk tonight. They were pulled through when the barrier broke. They want to go home. They want to rest." "Thomas," James grabbed the old man's arm. "The words, the ritual. How does it go?" Brennan nodded slowly. "I'll speak them, but she," he pointed at Jessica, "has to walk the circle, has to light the fire, has to make the offering. No one else can do it. Only the one who opened the way can seal it again." Jessica stepped forward. "Tell me what to do." Brennan pulled a small pouch from his pocket. Salt. He moved around the clearing, retracing the protective circle, his hands shaking but his voice steady as he muttered in what sounded like Gaelic. The dead continued their work, building the bonfire higher, stronger, layering in rowan branches and oak and hawthorn, the traditional woods of protection. At 11:30, the bonfire was complete. The salt circle was restored, and Brennan turned to Jessica with something in his hand, a small knife, blade glinting in the starlight. "When I give the word," he said quietly, "you'll walk the circle 3 times, sunrise direction. On the 3rd pass, you'll cut your palm and let blood fall on the bonfire. As you do, you'll speak after me. You'll offer a piece of yourself, not just blood, but something more. Years, memory, future, something that costs. The ward demands payment. The veil demands acknowledgement. Do you understand?" Jessica took the knife. Her hand trembled, but she nodded. "I understand." "Then we begin." Brennan started to chant. The words were old, older than English, older than the mountains themselves. Celtic prayers and protections passed down through generations of Scots-Irish settlers who'd brought them to these New World forests. James found himself understanding pieces, ancient words for barrier, for ward, for the thin places where worlds touched. Jessica began to walk. Once around the circle, her steps measured, deliberate. The dead watched, silent. The wind dropped to nothing. Even the hoofbeats faded, though James could still feel the Dullahan's presence nearby, watching, waiting. 2nd pass. Jessica's face was set, determined. Blood from where she'd cut her palm dripped onto the salt line, marking her path. Brennan's chanting grew louder, more insistent. 3rd pass. As Jessica reached the bonfire, she held her bleeding palm over the wood and spoke the words Brennan fed her. "I offer blood, I offer breath, I offer years, 5 from my span, given freely to seal what I broke. I offer memory, the memory of this night to hold the ward. I offer future, the children I might have had, their lives traded for the lives I endangered. Accept my offering, accept my debt. Close the veil. Send the dead to rest." She lit the fire. Flame roared up from the bonfire 30 feet high, hot enough to drive James back. But it wasn't normal fire. It burned blue and green and silver, colors that shouldn't exist in flame. And as it rose, the dead began to fade. One by one, they disappeared. The recent dead first. Old Man Henderson, the Miller girl. The others James had recognized. Then the older ones. The spirits from decades and centuries past. They walked into the flame and were gone, returning to wherever they'd come from, released from the pull that had dragged them through the torn veil. Brennan collapsed, his chanting finished. James rushed to him, helped him sit. The old man was smiling, tears running down his weathered face. "She did it," he whispered. "The girl did it. The ward is sealed." But Jessica stood motionless before the fire, her eyes empty, tears streaming down her face. "I can't remember," she said softly. "I can't remember their names, my parents. I know I had parents, but I can't remember their names. I can't remember." Oh God, what did I forget? What did I give up? James's phone buzzed. Sarah. I don't know what's happening, but it stopped. The kids in the street are gone. Emma and Michael are asleep. Are you okay? Please be okay. He texted back, coming home. I love you all. I'm so sorry. I love you. The hoofbeats came one final time. The Dullahan emerged from the trees, its horse gleaming in the bonfire's otherworldly light. The rider approached the edge of the circle, close enough that James could see impossible details. The black armor, the silver bridle, the rotted flesh of the severed head. The debt is paid, the Dullahan said. The ward is sealed. The veil will hold another year. Well done, girl. You have purchased life with life, future with future. The price was steep. The cost is permanent. But you live. Your marked ones live. The balance is restored. Will I ever remember? Jessica asked, her voice breaking. What I forgot? What I gave up? No, the rider said, not unkindly. That is the nature of the offering. What is given to the veil is gone forever. But know this, you saved more than you know. The dead walk no more. The barrier stands. And next Samhain, when the veil grows thin again, it will hold because you sealed it true. The horse reared once and the Dullahan was gone, vanishing between one heartbeat and the next. The bonfire began to burn down, its supernatural colors fading to normal orange and yellow. The temperature rose, the wind calmed, and overhead, the stars came out, bright and cold and eternal. James looked at his watch. 11:58 p.m., 2 minutes until midnight, 2 minutes until Halloween ended and November began. Come on, he said to Jessica. Let me get you out of here. She let him lead her away from the clearing back toward the trail. Brennan followed, leaning on James for support. Behind them, the bonfire burned as it was meant to burn, a ward and a barrier, a light in the darkness to show the dead the way home and keep them there. They reached the trailhead at 12:15 a.m. November 1st, All Saints' Day, the Day of the Dead. Halloween was over. James's truck was still there, and so was Jessica's car. Everything looked normal, mundane, as if the last 7 hours had been a nightmare. But Jessica's palm was bandaged, Brennan was pale and shaking, and James could still hear phantom hoofbeats in the distance, fading but never quite gone. He drove Jessica to the hospital, Brennan insisting he was fine, just tired, he'd drive himself home. At the ER, Jessica told the doctors she'd gotten lost hiking and cut her hand on a rock. They stitched her palm, gave her antibiotics, released her with instructions to follow up with her regular doctor. The whole time, she kept staring at nothing, trying to remember things that were no longer there. James waited until her roommate arrived to take her home. Then he drove through the empty streets of the small mountain town, past houses with their porch lights off, past jack-o'-lanterns burning low, past scattered candy wrappers blowing in the wind. Normal. Ordinary. A Halloween like any other, except for those who knew, who'd seen, who'd paid the price. He reached his own house at 1:30 a.m. Sarah met him at the door, pulling him into a fierce hug. What happened out there? She demanded. You look like you've seen a ghost. Just a rough night, James said, which was true. Lost hiker, complicated rescue. But everyone's okay. Everyone's safe. The kids were so disappointed you missed Halloween, Sarah said, leading him inside. But they're asleep now. You can take them out for extra candy tomorrow if you want. James nodded, not trusting himself to speak. He climbed the stairs to his children's rooms. Emma first, still in her princess costume, face paint smudged, candy bucket beside her bed. He kissed her forehead, whispered that he loved her, promised himself he'd never miss another Halloween. Then Michael's room. His son slept in his Spider-Man costume, mask on the nightstand, web shooters on the floor. James stood in the doorway for a long time, just watching him breathe, grateful beyond words that he could. He went to his own bedroom finally, exhausted, and found Sarah waiting up for him. James, she said softly, what really happened? He wanted to tell her, wanted to explain about the bonfire and the dead and the Dullahan and the choice Jessica made. But looking at his wife, at the normal, safe life they'd built, he couldn't find the words. How could he explain that his children had been marked by death itself? That a girl he'd never met had given up years of her life and memories of her family to save them? Just Ranger stuff, he said finally. You know how Halloween gets. People taking risks, ignoring warnings, thinking the mountains are just scenery. Sarah studied his face, and he could tell she knew he was holding back. But she nodded, accepting his silence. Get some sleep. You look like you need it. James lay down, but sleep wouldn't come. He stared at the ceiling, listening to the house settle, and thought about Jessica Campbell. She'd saved his family. She'd paid a price he couldn't imagine. And she'd done it willingly, knowing what it would cost, because it was the right thing to do. In the morning, he'd go back to the forest. He'd check the bonfire site, make sure it was safe, document what had happened in his official report. He'd lie, of course. He'd say the structure collapsed accidentally, was rebuilt by the Historical Society, no harm done. He'd write a report about a lost hiker found safe, no extraordinary circumstances. He'd keep the secret that Brennan and his predecessors had kept for over a century, that the bonfire wasn't tradition, it was necessity, and the barrier it maintained was real. But tonight, in the dark hours after midnight on All Saints' Day, James Morrison lay awake and gave thanks. Thanks that he was home. Thanks that his children were safe. Thanks that a stranger had been brave enough to pay a debt that wasn't entirely hers to pay. And he made a vow. Next Halloween, he would be there at the bonfire. He would help Brennan with the ritual. He would make sure the ward was built properly, protected properly, respected properly. Because now he knew. Now he understood. The veil was thin. The dead were real. And on Halloween night, when Samhain came around again and the boundary between worlds grew gossamer thin, only tradition and ritual and sacrifice kept the darkness at bay. The hoofbeats echoed one final time in his memory, and then they were gone. James closed his eyes and slept. Outside in the forest, the bonfire burned down to embers. The salt circle held. The ward stood strong, and in the spaces between heartbeats, in the thin places where worlds touched, the Dullahan rode on, searching for the next soul that would be owed when another Halloween came around. But that was a year away. For now, the debt was paid. The barrier held. The living lived, and the dead rested, and the ancient balance between the worlds was restored. Until next Samhain, when it would all begin again. I hope this Halloween literary nightmare has haunted you. If you appreciated this seasonal terror, consider following for more Halloween stories. What moment of this cursed night terrified you most? What do you think Jessica really gave up when she sealed the veil? Happy Halloween. The transfer papers had come through 3 weeks before Halloween, and Matt had been grateful for the timing. A fresh start in Olympic National Park, Washington, far from the desert heat of his previous post in Arizona, far from the memories he'd rather leave behind. The paperwork described it as a career advancement opportunity, but Matt knew bureaucratic euphemism when he saw it. They needed bodies in the field, and he needed a change. Simple as that. What the paperwork hadn't mentioned were the local superstitions. October 31st dawned cold and overcast, the kind of Pacific Northwest morning where mist clung to the towering Douglas firs like something alive. Matt stood outside the ranger station, nursing his third cup of coffee and watching carved pumpkins appear on porches across the small town of Forks, visible in the valley below. His supervisor, a grizzled veteran named Carson, hadn't shown up yet, which was unusual. Carson ran the station like a military operation, always early, always prepared. Matt checked his watch. 7:45. He had a patrol scheduled for 9, covering the northern trails where day hikers sometimes got ambitious and found themselves lost by nightfall. Halloween fell on a Saturday this year, 2003, a date Matt would remember for the rest of his life, which meant the trails would see more traffic than usual. Tourists loved the idea of hiking through spooky forests on Halloween. Matt found it mostly annoying. More people meant more rescues, more injuries, more idiots taking selfies near cliff edges. The station door banged open and Carson emerged, looking like he hadn't slept. His weathered face was drawn, and there was something in his eyes that Matt had never seen before. Fear. No, something worse. Resignation. "You're late," Matt said, keeping his tone light. Carson didn't smile. "You working the overnight shift?" "Scheduled for day patrol. Jenkins has the overnight." "Jenkins called in sick." Carson lit a cigarette with shaking hands. "You're on until dawn." Matt felt irritation spike. "Carson, I've got plans. Cancel them." The older ranger's voice was flat. "You're new, so you don't know. But tonight..." He trailed off, took a long drag. "Just stay on the main roads. Don't go into the deep woods after dark, no matter what you hear." "What's that supposed to mean?" Carson looked at him for a long moment. "You ever wonder why this station has such high turnover? Why nobody stays more than a few years?" Matt shrugged. "Remote location, weather, same as anywhere. It's because of Halloween." Carson's cigarette trembled. "Every year, someone goes missing. Sometimes they come back. Sometimes..." He shook his head. "The old-timers, the locals, they know. They don't come up here tonight. They lock their doors, put out their jack-o'-lanterns, leave offerings on their porches." "Offerings?" Matt couldn't keep the skepticism from his voice. "Come on, Carson, it's just Halloween. Kids in costumes, candy, fake spider webs." "This isn't about kids in costumes." Carson's voice was sharp. "This is old. Older than this country. The tribes that lived here first, they knew about this place. They called it different names, but they all meant the same thing. Thin place. Where the veil between worlds wears down." He crushed his cigarette under his boot. "Especially tonight." Matt wanted to laugh, but something in Carson's expression stopped him. The man was serious. Deadly serious. "Look," Carson continued, "I know how it sounds. I was like you when I started, didn't believe a word of it. But I've been here 19 years, and I've seen..." He paused. "I've seen things that don't make sense. Heard things. Lost people who should never have gotten lost. And every single incident, October 31st. So what are you saying? Ghosts? Monsters?" "I'm saying stay on the main roads. I'm saying if you hear children's voices in the woods after dark, you drive the other way. I'm saying there are traditions in this area that go back generations, and there's usually a reason traditions survive." Carson pulled out a small carved figure from his pocket, a crude wooden man wrapped in red thread. "Here, protection charm. Old Mrs. Kowalski at the general store makes them. Most of the rangers carry one." Matt took it more to humor the man than anything else. "Thanks. One more thing." Carson met his eyes. "If you see kids trick-or-treating out there, I mean really out there, miles from any houses, you call it in immediately. You don't approach them. You don't try to help them. You just call it in and leave, understand?" "Sure," Matt said, pocketing the charm. "Whatever you say." Carson studied him, seemed about to say more, then just shook his head. "Radio check every hour. Don't miss any." The morning passed uneventfully. Matt drove the northern loop, checking trailheads, marking trail damage from the recent storms. He passed a few early hikers, a retired couple from Seattle, a group of college kids heading to some of the hot springs. Normal, mundane. Exactly what he expected. By noon, he'd almost forgotten Carson's weird warnings. Almost. He stopped for lunch at the Crescent Lake overlook, eating a sandwich while watching clouds roll across the water. His radio crackled, base to Ranger Sullivan. Matt keyed the mic. "Sullivan here. We've got a missing person report. Amanda Reeves, 26, failed to check in from a solo day hike. Her car's at the Aurora Ridge trailhead. Sister called it in." Matt consulted his map. Aurora Ridge, a moderate trail about 6 miles round trip. Popular with photographers for the fall colors. "I'm 15 minutes out. Description? 5'6", brown hair, wearing a red jacket. She's experienced, does this trail regularly. Sister says she was supposed to be back by 11. Matt checked his watch. 1:30. Copy that. Heading there now. The Aurora Ridge parking area held only one vehicle when Matt arrived, a green Subaru with local plates and a collection of hiking stickers on the back window. He ran the plates. Confirmed. Amanda Reeves. He grabbed his pack, checked his radio, and started up the trail. The path wound through old growth forest, massive trees creating a cathedral-like atmosphere. Autumn had painted the underbrush in rust and gold, and somewhere overhead a raven called out. Matt moved quickly, calling Amanda's name every few minutes, scanning for any sign of her. An hour in, he found her first marker, a bandana tied to a tree branch. Not a distress signal, just a casual trail marker people sometimes left, but it told him she'd made it this far. The trail split at the 2-mile mark. The main path continued to the ridge overlook. A fainter trail, barely more than a game path, branched off to the left. Matt knew from his maps that it went nowhere official, just petered out in the deep forest. Something made him check the side trail. 10 feet in, he found a fresh boot print in the mud. Size 7, maybe 8. Could be Amanda's. Matt keyed his radio. Base, I'm on Aurora Ridge Trail. Found possible tracks heading off trail west of the main path. Investigating. Copy that. Be careful. It's going to be dark soon. Matt glanced up. Through the canopy, the sky was already dimming to that peculiar twilight that came early to these dense forests. He checked his watch. 4:30. He had maybe 90 minutes of decent light left. He followed the boot prints deeper into the forest. The tracks were clear at first, then became sporadic as the ground turned rocky. Matt swept his flashlight beam across the undergrowth, looking for any sign. Broken branches, disturbed leaves, anything. That's when he heard it. Children's laughter, distant but unmistakable. High-pitched giggles echoing through the trees. Matt froze. Out here, miles from the nearest house? He scanned the darkening forest, seeing nothing but trees and shadows. "Hello?" he called. "Anyone there?" The laughter came again, closer now, and with it, a sound that made his blood run cold. Trick or treat. Small voices singing the words, multiple voices. Matt's hand went to the wooden charm in his pocket. Carson's warning echoed in his mind. If you see kids trick-or-treating out there, you call it in immediately. "This is Ranger Sullivan," he called out, keeping his voice official. "If there are children out here, you need to identify yourselves. It's not safe." Movement caught his eye. Through the trees, perhaps 50 yards away, he saw them. Children. 6 of them, maybe 7. Small figures in costumes, moving through the forest in a line. They were too far away to see clearly in the failing light, but he could make out their shapes. One dressed as a ghost, white sheet trailing. Another in what looked like a witch's hat. A third in something dark that might have been a vampire cape. "Hey!" Matt started toward them. "Stop right there." They didn't stop. They kept walking. That same measured pace, weaving between the trees. And as Matt got closer, he realized something was wrong with the way they moved. Too smooth, too synchronized, like they were gliding rather than walking. He broke into a jog, bushwhacking through ferns and over fallen logs. "I said stop. This is a restricted." They vanished. One moment they were there, clear as day. The next, gone. Matt reached the spot where he'd seen them and found nothing. No tracks, no disturbance in the undergrowth. Nothing. His heart hammered against his ribs. He turned in a slow circle, flashlight cutting through the deepening gloom. That's when he saw Amanda. She was standing about 30 yards away between 2 massive cedars, just standing there perfectly still, her red jacket bright against the dark forest. Her back was to him. "Amanda!" Relief flooded through him. "Amanda Reeves?" She didn't respond, didn't move. Matt approached carefully. "Ms. Reeves, I'm Ranger Sullivan. Your sister reported you missing. Are you injured?" Still no response. She stood rigid, arms at her sides, head slightly tilted as if listening to something. "Amanda?" Matt was 10 feet away now, close enough to see that her jacket was torn, branches and leaves caught in her hair. "Can you hear me?" She turned her head, not all the way around, just enough for him to see her profile, and Matt saw that her eyes were wide, unblinking, filled with an expression he'd seen before on the faces of trauma victims. Not fear, beyond fear, a kind of absolute terror that had broken something fundamental in her mind. "They're coming," she whispered. "They always come when the door opens." "Who's coming? Amanda, we need to get you. Trick or treat." Her voice was hollow, mechanical. "Trick or treat. Give them something or they'll take everything." Then she started walking. Not toward Matt, not toward the trail. She walked straight ahead, into the darkest part of the forest, moving with that same strange gliding motion he'd seen in the children. "Amanda, stop!" Matt grabbed for her arm. His hand passed through her jacket, not through her body, through the fabric itself. Like she wasn't completely solid. Like she was already halfway somewhere else. Matt jerked his hand back, his mind refusing to process what had just happened. Amanda kept walking, moving between the trees, and Matt stumbled after her, his training screaming at him to maintain physical contact with the victim while his instincts shrieked at him to run. The forest changed as he followed her deeper. The trees grew closer together, their branches interlocking overhead to block out the last remnants of daylight. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in as many steps. Matt's breath came out in white clouds, and then he heard them again. The children. They emerged from behind trees, from beneath fallen logs, from shadows that shouldn't have been deep enough to hide anything. 6 of them. 7. 8. More appearing every second. Matt's flashlight beam swept across them and his stomach lurched. They were wearing costumes. Old costumes. A ghost made from a sheet that was yellowed with age. Holes cut for eyes. A witch with a pointed hat that looked hand-sewn. The fabric moth-eaten. A vampire with a cape that had been red once but was now rust-brown. A scarecrow with real straw sticking out from sleeves and collar. A skeleton in pajamas painted with crude bones. A black cat mask over a face that was too pale, too still, but it was their eyes that truly frightened him. They were wrong. Not vacant. That would have been better. They were aware, intelligent, and absolutely focused on Amanda. One of them, the ghost, held out a pillowcase bag. "Trick or treat," it said in a voice like wind through empty rooms. Amanda stopped walking. She stood swaying slightly, her eyes still wide and unseeing. Then, very slowly, she reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a granola bar. She held it out toward the ghost child. The ghost took it, put it in the bag. The other children moved closer, forming a circle around Amanda. Each one held out a bag or basket or plastic pumpkin bucket, containers that should have been bright orange or decorated with cartoon characters, but were instead faded and dirty and old, so old. "Trick or treat," they chorused together. Amanda's hands moved mechanically, pulling items from her pockets. A pack of gum, car keys, a hair tie, a crumpled receipt. She gave them everything, her movements puppet-like, controlled by something else. Matt found his voice. "Stop! Leave her alone!" None of them looked at him. They only had eyes for Amanda. When her pockets were empty, the children moved closer still. The one in the cat mask reached out with small hands and took hold of Amanda's sleeve. The scarecrow took her other arm. The skeleton child took her hand. "No!" Matt lunged forward. A child stepped into his path. The vampire. Up close, Matt could see that the cape wasn't rust-brown from age. It was caked with old blood. The child's face was corpse-pale, lips pulled back from teeth that were too sharp, eyes that were flat and dead and hungry. "You're not invited," the vampire child said. Matt tried to push past. His hands met solid resistance, not the child's body, but something else. An invisible barrier, like pressing against thick ice. The more he pushed, the colder it got, until his fingers went numb. Beyond the barrier, the children were leading Amanda away. She walked docilely between them, her expression never changing, as they guided her deeper into the forest. "Amanda!" Matt's shout came out strangled. He grabbed his radio with freezing fingers. Base, this is Sullivan. I need immediate backup at... He looked around, trying to get his bearings. Nothing looked familiar. West of Aurora Ridge Trail, approximately 2 miles. I have visual on Amanda Reeves and... The radio crackled. Through the static, he heard Carson's voice. Sullivan. Can't. Breaking. Where? Aurora Ridge. Send everyone. Matt was screaming now. There are people out here. They've got Amanda. The vampire child smiled at him. We're not people. Then they were gone. All of them. Amanda, the children, vanished between one heartbeat and the next. The invisible barrier disappeared, and Matt stumbled forward, nearly falling. He caught himself against a tree, breathing hard. The forest was suddenly absolutely silent. No wind, no bird calls, no insects, nothing. Matt ran. He crashed through the undergrowth, following the direction they'd gone, his flashlight beam jerking wildly as branches whipped at his face. Amanda! No response. He ran until his lungs burned, until his legs screamed, until he emerged into a small clearing and had to stop, doubled over, gasping for air. The clearing was circular, perhaps 20 feet across. In its center stood a structure that made no sense. A ring of children's toys arranged in a perfect circle. Dolls with missing eyes. A tricycle with rusted wheels. Building blocks spelling out words in a language Matt didn't recognize. A rocking horse with its mane torn out. All of them old, decades old, arranged with deliberate care. And in the center of the ring, a carved pumpkin. Not a modern jack-o'-lantern with a simple triangle face. This one had an intricately carved scene. Children dancing around a bonfire, their mouths open as if singing. The candle inside wasn't lit, but as Matt watched, it flickered to life on its own. He backed away from the clearing, every instinct telling him this was wrong, this was a place he shouldn't be. His radio crackled to life. Carson's voice, clearer now. Sullivan, what's your status? Carson? Matt nearly sobbed with relief. I saw them. The children. They took Amanda, they weren't solid, they couldn't be real, but they took her and... Matt, listen to me. Carson's voice was steady, the voice of someone who'd been here before. Where are you exactly? I don't know. Some clearing with toys and a jack-o'-lantern and... Jesus Christ. Carson's voice went hollow. You're at the offering circle. Matt, you need to leave. Right now. Don't touch anything. Don't take anything. Just mark which direction they went and get out. But Amanda... It's too late for Amanda. It's been too late since the moment they touched her. Matt, the sun's down. It's full dark now. That means it's Halloween night, the actual night, and you're in the deep woods. You need to get back to the main trail before... The radio died with a squeal of static. Matt shook it. Carson? Carson? Nothing. He was alone in the clearing, with the impossible pumpkin casting dancing shadows across the ring of decaying toys. And as he stood there, he heard it again. Laughter. Children's laughter coming from all around him. Trick or treat, they sang out in the darkness. Trick or treat. Give us something sweet. Matt ran. He didn't know which direction, didn't care. He just ran, his flashlight beam bouncing crazily, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Behind him, around him, the voices followed. Trick or treat, smell our feet, give us something good to eat. They were playing with him. He could hear it in their voices. Delight, amusement, the joy of a cat with a mouse. His flashlight flickered. The battery shouldn't be dying. It was fresh that morning, but the beam dimmed and brightened erratically. He burst through a line of trees and found himself on a trail. Not the main trail. This one was narrower, less maintained, but it was something. He followed it, running until he saw lights ahead. The lights resolved into candles, dozens of them placed along both sides of the trail, their flames impossibly steady despite the wind that had picked up. And between the candles, more carved pumpkins. These weren't the crude faces of modern Halloween. These were works of art, intricately carved with scenes of harvests and deaths and things dancing in moonlight. Matt slowed to a walk. his hand on his service weapon even though he knew somehow that it wouldn't help. The trail led him to another clearing, this one larger, and in its center sat a house. No, not a house. A structure made of branches and leaves and what looked like bones, all woven together in a parody of a child's playhouse. Windows cut from bark, a door made of interlaced sticks, and spilling from every window, warm golden light. Come in, a child's voice called from inside. The party's started. Everyone's here. Matt took a step toward it, then another, moving against his will. The wooden charm in his pocket suddenly burned hot against his leg, and he stopped. He pulled out the crude figure, the one Carson had given him. In the candlelight, he could see it was bound with red thread, and carved into its surface were symbols he didn't recognize. The wood was warm, almost hot, and as he held it, the pull toward the bone house weakened. "You can't stay out here forever," another voice said from the darkness. The vampire child stepped into the ring of candlelight. Up close, Matt could see it was a boy, maybe 9 or 10 when he died. The blood on his cape was real. Old, but real. When midnight comes, the door opens wide. Everything that's dead comes through. And we're hungry. "Where's Amanda?" Matt's voice shook. "With the others. The ones who didn't give enough. The ones who came to the thin place on the thin night." The boy tilted his head. "She'll be one of us by midnight. Unless what? Unless someone trades." The boy smiled, and Matt saw that his teeth really were sharp, filed to points or perhaps grown that way. Someone living, someone whole to take her place. That's always been the rule. A life for a life. That's what Halloween means, you know. Samhain. The time when the dead come back, but they can only stay if someone trades. You're insane. We're dead. The boy shrugged. There's a difference. We died on Halloween, all of us. Different years, different ways. Fell down a well, eaten by an animal, lost in the snow, drowned in the lake, hit by a car. And because we died on the night when the veil is thin, we couldn't move on. We're stuck here, in the between place. But every year, on our night, we get to walk again, to play again, to trick or treat. His smile widened. And we're so very hungry. More children emerged from the darkness. Matt counted 12 now, 15, 20. How many children had died in these woods over the years? How many had been claimed by the thin place on Halloween? They formed a circle around him, cutting off any escape. Each one held their treat bag open, waiting. The vampire boy spoke again. "You have until midnight to decide. Trade yourself for her or let her join us. Either way, we get what we need. That's the trick or treat of it, Ranger Man. You treat us right, or we trick you good." They vanished, all of them, gone in an instant, leaving Matt alone with the candles and the pumpkins and the impossible house of bones. His watch read 9:47 p.m. He had 2 hours and 13 minutes until midnight. Matt ran again, this time with purpose, pulling out his compass. North. He needed to go north to reach the main trail, then east to the station. The compass needle spun lazily, refusing to settle. He shook it, tapped it against his palm. The needle continued its slow rotation. Useless. Of course, he muttered. Nothing worked right here. Not radios, not compasses, not the basic laws of physics. This was the thin place, and on Halloween night, normal rules didn't apply. He had to think. There had to be a way. Carson's words came back to him. The old-timers, the locals, they know. They lock their doors, put out their jack-o'-lanterns, leave offerings on their porches. Offerings. That was the key, wasn't it? The children wanted treats. They wanted acknowledgement, appeasement, respect. That's what Halloween had always been about, giving the dead what they needed to stay peaceful. But what did he have to offer? His pockets were nearly empty. A pocket knife, his keys, a power bar, some cash, the wooden charm. The charm. He pulled it out again, studying it in his flashlight beam. It was warm, almost uncomfortably so. Protection magic, Carson had said. Old Mrs. Kowalski made them. These children had been powerful enough to take Amanda, to manifest physically, to transport him miles from where he should be. But they hadn't been able to cross the threshold when he held the charm. They couldn't touch him while he had it. So it had power. Real power. Something the dead respected. An idea formed in his mind. Crazy. But then everything tonight was crazy. He started walking, this time not running. He moved deliberately through the forest and he called out, "I want to make a trade." Silence. Then, from somewhere to his left, a giggle. "I'm listening." The boy's voice. "Not my life for hers, but this." Matt held up the charm. "This has power. You know it does. Protection magic, old magic, the kind that keeps the dead at bay. It's worth more than just one life." More giggling from multiple directions now. They were interested. "What do you want for it?" The girl in the cat mask stepped out from behind a tree. "Amanda, you let her go, unharmed, and I'll give you this. Plus," Matt thought fast, "plus a promise. I'll leave offerings every Halloween from now on. Real offerings, not cheap candy. Food, toys, things the dead can use. And I'll make sure other rangers know to do the same. We'll respect the thin place." "You'd do that?" A third voice, the witch child. "You'd honor us?" "Yes." Matt surprised himself with how much he meant it. These things were terrifying, yes. But they'd been children once. They'd died badly, violently, and been trapped here for who knew how long. Maybe they weren't evil. Maybe they were just hungry, desperate, forgotten. Interesting. The vampire boy appeared directly in front of him, close enough that Matt could see the age in those dead eyes. Decades, maybe centuries of waiting. A ranger who understands. That's rare. "So we have a deal?" "If..." The boy held up one finger. "You do one thing first. You have to find her. We'll give you until midnight, like we said. You find Amanda before the clock strikes 12, bring her to the offering circle, and trade the charm for her life. If you fail..." He smiled. "Well, then we keep you both." "That's not. Those are the terms. Midnight is when the veil is thinnest, when the door opens widest. That's when trades can be made. Not before." He cocked his head. "It's 10:15 now. The circle is 2 miles northwest of here. Amanda is somewhere in between. Better start looking, Ranger Man." They vanished again, and Matt was alone. He closed his eyes, forcing himself to think. They were playing games, yes, but games had rules. And they'd given him a chance. That meant something. He opened his eyes and looked around. He needed to find signs, tracks, anything that might lead him to Amanda. But in this supernatural darkness, how could he? Wait. The candles, the pumpkins. They were still there, lining the trail. And now that he looked closer, he could see they didn't form a straight line. They curved, branched, formed patterns in the darkness. Not random placement. They were marking paths. Matt followed the densest concentration of candlelight, moving quickly but carefully. The trail led him through a grove of ancient cedars, past a stream that ran backwards uphill, around a boulder carved with symbols that hurt his eyes to look at directly. And then he heard her. "Help me." Amanda's voice weak and terrified. Matt ran toward the sound, his flashlight finally giving out completely. But he didn't need it. The candlelight was enough. He found her at the base of a massive oak tree, huddled against its trunk. She looked solid now, real, her eyes focused if terrified. "Amanda." Matt knelt beside her. "Can you move?" They said they'd let me go if someone came for me. If someone cared enough." She was crying. "My sister." "Did she?" "She called it in, that's how I found you." Matt helped her to her feet. "Can you walk?" She nodded, leaning heavily on him. "What time is it?" Matt checked his watch. The numbers glowed an eerie green. 11:23 p.m. "We need to move. Now." They ran. Or rather, Matt ran while half carrying Amanda. She was stronger than she looked, keeping pace despite her ordeal. The candlelight guided them, always showing the way. And Matt realized the children were keeping their word. They were being led to the offering circle. They burst into the clearing at 11:52 p.m. The toys were still there, arranged in their perfect circle. The carved pumpkin burned brighter now, its flame dancing impossibly high. And waiting around the perimeter were the children. All of them. Matt counted at least 30 now, maybe more appearing as he watched. "You found her." The vampire boy stepped forward. "We're impressed. Most don't even try. I kept my end of the bargain. Now you keep yours." Matt pulled out the wooden charm. It was so hot now it almost burned his palm. The charm for the girl agreed. The boy held out his hand. "But the midnight trade requires one more thing. You have to give it freely, not from fear, not from obligation, from respect." Matt looked down at the crude wooden figure, at the red thread wrapped around it, at the symbols carved into its surface. Old Mrs. Kowalski had made it, Carson said. Made it to protect rangers who had to work on Halloween night. She probably made dozens every year. Probably had for decades. A tradition. A recognition that some things were real, even if they didn't make sense. A sign of respect for the thin place and the things that lived there. "I give this freely," Matt said clearly, "as a gift to those who walk between worlds on Halloween night, in exchange for Amanda's freedom, and as a promise to honor this place and its traditions from now on." The boy took the charm. As his small dead fingers closed around it, the wooden figure began to glow. Soft at first, then brighter until Matt had to look away. When he could see again, the charm was gone. But the children looked different. Less ghostly, more solid, more real. "Thank you," the boy said, and for the first time his voice sounded human, young, like the child he'd once been. "It's been so long since anyone treated us with kindness instead of fear." The other children were smiling now, genuine smiles instead of those predatory grins. The girl in the cat mask waved. The witch child did a little curtsy. One by one they began to fade, becoming transparent in the candlelight. "Go," the boy said to Matt and Amanda. "Follow the candles north. They'll take you back to the main trail, and remember your promise." "I will," Matt said. "Happy Halloween, Ranger Man." The boy was almost gone now, just a shadow in the darkness. "May you have many more." Then they were alone. Matt checked his watch as the last of the children vanished. 11:59 p.m. They had 1 minute until midnight. He took Amanda's arm. "Run!" They ran, following the line of candles that appeared before them, marking a clear path through the forest. Behind them, Matt heard a sound like a door opening, a great creaking, groaning noise as if the fabric of reality itself was tearing. The veil was opening for Halloween midnight, and he didn't want to be there when it did. The candles led them forward, faster, faster, and then they burst through a line of trees and onto blessed, normal, graveled trail. The Aurora Ridge Trail, exactly where it should be. Matt's watch ticked over to 12 a.m. November 1st. Halloween was over. They walked the rest of the way back to the trailhead in silence. Amanda seemed to be in shock, moving mechanically but steadily. Matt didn't try to make her talk. There would be time for that later, for reports and explanations and all the things that would come after. Carson was waiting at the parking area, along with 2 other rangers and an ambulance. He took one look at Matt's face and nodded slowly, understanding in his eyes. "You saw them," Carson said. It wasn't a question. "Yeah," Matt replied. "I saw them. And you made it back. We made a deal." Carson studied him for a long moment, then pulled out a fresh wooden charm and pressed it into Matt's hand. "You'll need a new one. Mrs. Kowalski's shop opens at 9. She'll want to hear what happened." As the ambulance took Amanda away, she'd be fine, they said, just dehydrated and in shock. Matt stood in the parking lot and watched the sky lighten with approaching dawn. November 1st, the day after Halloween. The veil was closed again. The dead returned to their realm, the thin place sealed for another year. But he knew they'd be back. Every October 31st, when the door opened and the children walked again, hungry, desperate, trapped between worlds. And true to his word, Matt would be ready for them. With offerings, with respect, with recognition that some things were real even if they didn't make sense. The forest watched him with ancient eyes as the sun rose. Matt felt its attention, felt the awareness of the thin place, and he understood finally what Carson and the locals and Mrs. Kowalski had always known. Some traditions survived because they had to. Some places were different. Some nights were sacred. And on Halloween, in the thin places where the veil wore down, the dead walked. They always had. They always would. The only question was whether the living would have the wisdom to treat them with respect. Matt got in his truck and drove toward town, toward coffee and paperwork and the mundane world of daylight. But in his pocket, where the old charm had been, he felt the phantom warmth of that wooden figure. A reminder, a promise. He would keep it. Every Halloween from now on, he would remember, because in the Olympic National Forest on October 31st, when the sun went down and the children sang their ancient song, trick or treat, someone needed to be there to give them what they wanted, before they took what they needed. I hope this Halloween tale has haunted you appropriately. If you enjoyed this supernatural horror, consider sharing it with fellow horror enthusiasts. What moment terrified you most? The first sighting of the spectral children, the offering circle, or the midnight trade? What do you think really happened when the veil was thin? Happy Halloween.